Watch takeoff of 7.
B-2 bombers from a Musari. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. How does Xavier Teitelman talk about it? That already means the mission had been approved the day before, which means that as early as Friday, everyone at the White House and in the headquarters knew about it. It takes a lot of time to load these bombs. There is obviously the pilot's briefing, all the security, the preparation, everyone on the ground knows as well, and there is the preparation of the protective bubble. We know there are fighter jets that are certainly in the air, especially when the planes are going to fly at 6 in the morning. Indeed, they are so heavy with those 2 bombs of 12.5 tons each that they take off with almost no fuel, and right from the start, they take off. And they have to be refueled, and they will be accompanied like that by different refueling planes to guide them. From the continental United States to cross half the Earth, they arrive at midnight in the airspace.
Wait, you're going too fast, because in the meantime, Saturday, 11 p.m., these are diversionary shots, meaning to deceive the Iranians, the submarines fire.
Tomahawks, yes, not just for diversion. They have targets. They're not firing into the air just to make fireworks. They're aiming at targets, some of which are ballistic or nuclear targets, but of secondary importance. Besides, these planes aren't going directly from Whiteman to Iran. They're pretending to go through Guam. Some of the planes, since there are a bit more than 7 involved, pretend to stop there, while others leave directly.
And we were fooled because we all kept repeating that over and over. We repeat that over and over.
Smoke screening is part of military operations. Let me remind you, that's 125 planes for this operation. It's not 6 plus 1 B-2, B-2A Spirit, because that's a special category of B-2. But in this case, it's 125 aircraft mobilized for the entire operation. As Xavier Teitelman said very well, it's a huge organization that required months of preparation, hypothetical, and at least 24 to 48 hours. We might give ourselves a bit of time because there's a lot of resupplying and a lot of smoke operations going on at the same time. And then above all, there's a first wave that hides things, followed by a protective wave, and then a second wave that will finish, some sites as well. So it's a very, very large deployment. It's the biggest American air deployment since the Gulf War.
I think
in terms of numbers, but
that's under your control. At the same time, yes, it's absolutely possible. Let's continue the movie.
It's true that there was that operation with those stealth planes, but would it have been possible without the Israelis first destroying the air defenses?
The B-2, yes. In this case, it's the only one that can really violate any airspace in the world without being detected. We remember, for example, that during the war in Afghanistan, the Americans were able to enter Afghanistan to bomb with heavy bombs at the time without asking Pakistan's permission. Quite simply because this plane can't be detected by conventional radars. There are some U-band radars, though. It's very specific, and they've already been destroyed by the Israelis in the past. But even the Iranians, at first glance, they weren't able to detect it, even if the Israelis hadn't carried out their prior campaign.
A word about the plane. You who are a true Frenchman, very French, openly patriotic, sovereignist, well, you have it all. You only like the rifle, but there's more to life than just the rifle. Look at this plane. It was somewhat modeled after the Falcon, I think. The Falcon's flight, its penetration through the air, it's a killing machine, obviously, that's the side, but it's also a machine of
war that's extremely advanced. No, from an aeronautical point of view, it's extraordinary. It's the quintessence of the best that was made at the end of the Cold War in the 1990s. It was developed precisely to deceive all Soviet air defenses, which at the time were obviously the main threat. At the end of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, since there were no more enemies facing them, instead of buying 100, they only ordered 21. This means that the unit cost of each of these planes is over 2 billion euros, with incredible maintenance requirements. It's so thin, so you can see its shape, which is very unique. The waves won't bounce back to the radar that's emitting them, and even the radar, it absorbs the waves. The particles, the waves will be trapped inside the paint, so the paint costs almost $40,000 per liter. And it can't land anywhere except certain bases where it operates, under a controlled environment. So it's an absolutely incredible technological aircraft. And this aircraft,
it has a potential successor, the B-20.
And one which
is the even more advanced version of this one, which will probably cost just as much or even more. But we're there, we should probably have a bigger order. Let's continue the film.
What's interesting is that the planes, the bombers were used especially on the Fordo and Natanz sites. But for the disappearing site, it was mainly the Tomahawks.
Because it's not heavily protected, it's not very deep. Actually, we've talked about the 3 most important sites, 2 of which are very, very well protected. Natanz, which is the oldest, but it's very deep and probably, well, where there's a shaft. So in that case, we're more like, and 2 bombs are enough. Fordo, which is the most complicated because it's in that logic. And by the way, you can see that the very white part of the Fordo site is the one that hasn't been the most destroyed, since it's the most visible, but it's not the most important.
When you see these satellite images, especially with the 6 different craters around Fordo, on the Fordo facility. Earlier, General Kempf was telling us that it was the surface that was hit. That's possible.
What is visible on the surface isn't huge, but actually, you have to understand. Just by their weight alone, they weigh 12.5 tons, they are dropped from a very, very high altitude. They will break the sound barrier, and they have a warhead that is extremely hardened. So simply, with that force and speed, that inertia, they will penetrate certain types of materials to depths of several dozen meters.
Tell us, you're used to analyzing images. I don't know if we can see the previous image where we can see the size of the holes. That is from that distance. If I may say, look, it's those holes up there on the left, those 3 holes. What are they? What kind are they?
Width, tens of meters, several tens of meters, but then a hole is several tens of meters, but it's also deep behind. And if their explosion actually manages to reach the cavity, we try to destroy all the electrical equipment. The overpressure will make everything below explode. And
they're shooting blindly. Or do the Americans have such a precise knowledge of what's underneath that they know exactly what's there? The Israelis. No one really knows if the operation was 50% successful, 80% or 100%.
No, so there's no possibility for now. Certainly the Iranians have people on the ground, and if the Iranians know, then certainly the Israelis know, and so do the Americans behind them. We don't. There is a possibility with certain types of satellites that have radars. They can see if the ground has sunk by 2 centimeters, which means after some complex calculations that it may have collapsed a little underneath. But we don't really have the understanding to know if these underground cellars are actually destroyed.
Today, is there a scan that allows us? We see the story of the fungus. Is there any scanner or radar that really lets us see 80
meters underground? No, there are gravitational waves that are called that because, in fact, they go through the entire Earth. And we can see if there are spaces, but knowing whether the space is still intact or not, as far as I know, that's not possible. We simply know if there is a cavity. This is used for the pyramids of Egypt, for example, so we could detect cavities in this way. Now, knowing what its condition is, we can't know that.
Let's go back to the film exactly. As for the events, we had stopped at a few minutes in, and they're in the airspace. I don't know if we can bring up the timeline of events again. And at 12:40, that's when the fire starts.
14 bombs on Fordo and Nathan.
6 times 2 and 1 time 2. A word about the scale of the fire, what it represents.
This deluge of fire. So we can imagine that we could do more, but not with single high-penetration bombs. We could drop a large number of weapons, for example, dozens and dozens of 1-ton bombs. That's also doable, but you won't have the ability to strike deep into what we've seen at some of these sites, like Natanz. Indeed, since the infrastructures are out in the open, Tomahawk cruise missiles launched by frigates or submarines were able to deal with them. So actually, it's not the total tonnage that really matters. By the way, these bombs weigh 12 tons, but not even a third of that weight is actually explosive. The total weight, in fact, is meant to go deep. But the volume, the penetration capability, the ability to strike and carry out unlikely operations on the other side of the world, in a single day without warning, without us being able to detect them, that obviously is American power being expressed as much as possible, and no other country in the world is capable of achieving something so efficient
and effective. To kill Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, it took 80 bombs dropped on the same spot by successive waves of aircraft to reach as deep as possible. That is around 30 to 40 meters, they say. And that's what made it possible to bury the leader of Hezbollah in his bunker. But that was with American bombs and Israeli planes.
We're learning more about the behind the scenes of this operation through the media outlet Axios tonight, which reveals that, at the request of the Trump administration, the Israeli Air Force destroyed several Iranian air defense systems in the 48 hours preceding the American strike on the Iranian nuclear facility at Fordo. And then, at Trump's request, it was addressed directly to Netanyahu last week. An important element after the president decided that he would carry out a military strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities, unless a diplomatic opportunity arises. The United States then provided Israel with a list of air defense systems they wanted to eliminate before the strike. And Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz had a call with Vice President Vance and Secretary of Defense Pideksef to continue the coordination.
Apparently, the Israelis
have clearly failed.
Every day, there are about 100 Israeli strikes. Above all, first, mobile missile launchers, air defense systems, Revolutionary Guard sites, and missile manufacturing sites. The Air Force. Scientists who may have escaped, some of them, by the way, fled to Russia on one of the emergency flights that evacuated the last
Scientific officials.
Iranians. They went to Moscow, some Russians too, by the way, but those were in Boucher. That's a different matter. The Boucher power plant itself apparently was vaguely affected, not the plant itself, but the surrounding area. The port, they say yes, but there were small deposits of various things. It's a port. There's always a lot of things going through. So these operations are carried out all the time. On the other hand, the Americans must have said within the framework of our firing corridor, we need to be particularly sure that, but it's drowned out by all the Israeli strikes on Iran. These are specific errands, but within the context of a visit to the supermarket.
When you look at the map, because the Americans have 40,000 men in the region, plus their 3 aircraft carriers, they have extremely sensitive points in the Strait of Hormuz. Xavier Titelman, where would the Iranians have the means to strike in retaliation?
So for Israel, you still need missiles with a range of 1,500 kilometers, so it's much more complicated to achieve. But on all the bases you see just to the south, some of them were indeed evacuated by the Americans beforehand because they suspected there would be reprisals. So they regrouped their forces on a smaller number of bases, but these are supposed to be better protected because there are systems
of TAD interception,
Patriot, and also some lower layer systems. So logically, if the Iranians start hitting any of these bases where they know there are still American fighter jets, that means that behind this, not only will the United States try to respond, which is logical, but also the country involved. These countries, if they themselves were bombed, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, could also take part in operations to destroy the launch sites of these missiles. Because once again, these countries have been suffering from the terrorism of the Iranian regime for decades, whether it's on oil infrastructure in Syria and so on. They might all want to take revenge today as well.
The Iranians are potentially going to try to take revenge. Regarding the Americans, you say we shouldn't be rational, so they're going to try, even if it's very dangerous for them. So here we see their aircraft carrier. There are bases. They have bases in Qatar. What? Where is Qatar? No.
The aircraft carrier is too complicated. Technically, they don't have the systems. You can't hit a moving target with a ballistic missile. Qatar, indeed, is a country that isn't really opposed to them, so obviously a country that wouldn't have many military means to respond would possibly be Iraq. The Emirates have a large fleet, they would take part, but maybe still the Emirates, who have already suffered attacks from Iran, Saudi Arabia. That would surprise me, because they're trying to pretend that they're more or less reconciled.
Netanyahu is actually in the process of regaining market share, according to all the polls. He has killed or maimed 1,500 Hezbollah terrorists, and he's hitting Hamas with, in addition, many innocent civilian victims. Moreover, in Gaza, he killed Agne, he killed so many, etc. And now, with his ally Trump, he's pulling off this move. In fact, he is
in the process of accumulating, from his point of view, victories. Militarily, it's obviously a success, and it's the result of decades of effort and preparation. So here, we're at the tip of the diamond. Politically, I don't think he made this decision for political reasons just because he was low in the polls at the time. There's the reality that the October 7th attack opened Israel's Pandora's box, which allows them to take action. Whereas, until then, they were rather in a wait-and-see position so as not to be accused precisely of making the situation worse. Having been attacked, they were able to allow themselves to carry out all these actions one after another, but it was clear proof that they were preparing for them and were ready to carry them out. The story of Hezbollah. With the beepers, that's 8 years of preparation. This targeting, we've known for a very long time that it was prepared because the sites obviously are known and the months are prepared. The coordination with the Americans of course claim that they are not involved, but still they opened the way so that the Americans could come. So there's still an accumulation of factors that make Israel all-powerful in the area today. The other countries around are either weakened, overthrown, or no longer have an army. So today it's basically a free-for-all now.
We have just learned that the Israeli army is currently striking, currently bombing military infrastructure sites in Tehran and in the west of Iran. So Netanyahu continues. He is carrying out a bombing campaign that is not about to stop.
I say 30, 45, 60 days. That's a normal amount of time given Israel's daily strike capability. If the Americans get involved, they can actually double or triple the volume, so maybe it will be shorter. But as it stands, we're looking at this going on until at least July. What is, according to
the risk of chaos? That's the word the President of the Republic used when he said, if we go as far as regime change by force, it will be chaos. the risk of the uncontrollable. Many people say, remember 2003, remember the Iraq War. We know how a war starts, we don't know how it continues.
It's clear that if we limit ourselves to very limited military operations on critical infrastructure related to nuclear facilities, it doesn't imply a collapse of the regime. On the other hand, we've seen Israel has also started to strike structures that prevent a rebellion from emerging. Even the state television, the radio, whether it's the Revolutionary Guards. So in the end, if today we had a revolution or the beginning of a revolution, like 2 years ago with the women, etc., who wanted to come forward, maybe militarily they would be helped. But an overthrow killing Ayatollah Rouhani, hoping that it would lead to something more favorable to Israel, that, obviously, that's the French position that would cause chaos, just like it has been chaos everywhere. The Afghans, after 20 years of American presence and trillions of dollars spent, it's the Taliban who are back again.
But Isabel Lacera, who was here on this set earlier, spoke with European diplomats who told her, "We prefer the dictators we know rather than total chaos." Is there also a certain reluctance when it comes to regime changes?
No, but everyone prefers the dictators they know to those they don't know, because that's always how it is. Everyone is very used to having a way of dialoguing and discussing with people who have been there for a long time, who have control of the armed forces. And then when there's an overthrow or upheaval, either you get a replacement, life is beautiful. Another dictator replaces a dictator. He gave his list, Khamenei has already given his list of successors. He transferred all powers to the Guardian Council just in case. He already anticipated it. There is a Guardian Council, a discernment council. The regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran is quite structured. The only one we can think will not be his successor is the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who is somewhat like a Fourth Republic president in France, but who at least was elected and was slightly less radical than the others. It's always very complicated in Iran to find someone more or less radical than others, because generally they're either in prison or in exile. But at least he was elected in a situation that was unexpected after the death of the previous president, who was the successor that Khamenei wanted, along with his son. Here, the difficulty is that for now, there is no structured opposition, nor any legitimate opponent
to take power. What you also need to understand is that we don't want to have the Afghans, the equivalent of the Taliban in Iran, who would have missiles with a range of 4,000 kilometers capable of reaching France. We must not forget the Shahab 3, Shahab 4, all the missiles, we are within range. That's why having groups, potentially, that could get hold of some of these missiles and fire a few of them is a concern, including against France, which doesn't have the ability to protect itself like Israel does. That's what we're afraid of, and that's actually why we might be worried about the country collapsing.